Bishop Chisholm did send me one study, and I reported on one study, and I looked at it and I wrote back to him. I said, this is an informal study that does not represent anything more than personal opinion. My last one has to do with my concern as a youth researcher. I've written at length in my book about the confusion of adolescent males regarding their sexual orientation. It is a time when they are especially vulnerable to the influence of their social environment. That is why I'm especially concerned about them. Now, if the ELCA Assembly in 2005 decides to ordain committed homosexuals and bless same-sex marriages, it will be seen as equating homosexuality with heterosexuality. It will be interpreted in the minds of people as a decision of the church that homosexuality is an orientation also created by God with no inherent dangers. It will be assumed that the orientation should therefore be viewed as normal and lauded as good. Now consider the implications of such a decision with respect to youth. Those who choose to view homosexuality as part of God's creation need to understand that the homosexual community includes two very different groups of people. One is a highly visible group we see in church and community affairs. The other is the group whose private face we seldom see. The first group consists of devout gays and lesbians who are active in our congregations, people living in committed relationships and contributing to the welfare of our country. They include pastors, theologians, professional people, and devoted citizens. Many are children of church members, children of pastors, children of people we know and respect. Without question, most of these people in their hearts have probably reconciled their orientation with Scripture and are intent now in living lives of accountability. Many in this group will deplore the behaviors of those in the following groups. The second group of homosexuals, might be the larger, presents a far different face. What they do and say is generally kept private and away from public scrutiny. It is an aspect of homosexuality seldom made public because it involves their dark side. We cannot pretend that the dark side will not affect the church if homosexuality is equated with heterosexuality. We do not have a firewall to isolate us from the influence of the second group. My concern, based on strong evidence, relates to the desire of adult gays, or some adult gays in the second group, for an adolescent boy as a lover. It is a characteristic found in the far greater incidence among them than heterosexual men's desire for adolescent girls. We're seeing it today in the sexual abuse of altar boys by gay Catholic priests. Several Catholic authorities have established the fact that almost all of the priests' victims are adolescent males, not prepubescent boys. According to the authoritative Encyclopedia of Homosexuality, this sexual desire of homosexual males for a teenage boy is to be expected. It says, until recently, man-boy love relationships were accepted as a part, and indeed, a major part of male homosexuality. We need only remember that in the early days of Rome, Sparta, Athens, and the like, it was common for homosexual men to have an adolescent boy as a lover. When the boy became an adult, he continued this cycle by finding a boy to love sexually. And as a result of this practice, the historian Boswell estimates that a majority of the men in these cities were involved in homosexual practices. And of course, I've already given the illustration about the Boy Scouts experience. Today, there is a North American Man-Boy Love Association, LAMLA, which is linked with the Gay Rights Coalition both nationally and internationally. This organization openly promotes sex with minor boys. It claims that boy lovers respond to the needs of boys that they love. Now, indicative of this point of view is a book published this year by the University of Minnesota Press entitled Harmful to Minors, The Perils of Protecting Children from Sex. The author, Judith Levine, contends that there is no proof that, quote, it's always harmful for kids to have a sexual relationship with adults, and adds, a boy's experience with a priest could be reported as positive. With such a stance characterizing the homosexual movement, it is not surprising that prostitution involving boys should become open and evident. In 1995, Dr. Judith Reisman of the Institute of Media Education made a content analysis of advertisements in the nation's most influential homosexual paper, The Advocate. She found that 63% of the personal ads sought or offered prostitution. Many of them openly solicited boys. Incidentally, her article was one of those rejected by the Stanford Law Review Board. Disturbing also is the evidence that she presents in her article, Crafting Homosexual Youth. She reports that some homosexual leaders are determined to gain access to schools, scouts, and other child institutions in order to, quote, institutionalize socialization techniques to bring homosexuality to mainstream youth, end of quote. Consider the implications for the youth of our church. Inasmuch as 1/4 of our adolescent males are confused over their sexual orientation, think how vulnerable they are to recruiting efforts. The threatening aspect of adult males recruiting young people as lovers, is reflected in 2 major studies. Here's what they conclude. Sexually abused youth are up to 7 times more likely to become adult homosexuals than comparable youth not abused. This means that if this predatory quality of males in the second group is allowed free course, we can expect to see the population of homosexuals in our church increase far beyond the 3% where it is now. We need only look at what has happened in the Roman Catholic Church. The bishop, oh, good night. I can't read my writing here. Wilton Gregory, the current head of the U.S. Conference of U.S. Catholic bishops, said this year, it's an ongoing struggle to make sure the Catholic priesthood is not dominated by homosexual men. Now, I'm also concerned, secondly, about the number of boys who have AIDS. Consider the implications for our youth of a change in policy. Should the ELCA, arguing for social justice, change its traditional position against homosexual behaviors, it will create a far greater injustice for its youth. I believe it will not only increase the number of youth drawn into homosexual activity, but with it the number inheriting AIDS, and for many, a death sentence. Consider the seriousness of AIDS. During the past 20 years, more Americans have died from AIDS than did Americans in World War I and World War II, and half of these due to homosexuality. Now consider the adolescent boys ages 13 to 24. The Center of Disease Control reported that as of the year 2000, over 15,000 teenagers were infected with the disease as a result of sex with adult men. Another study of AIDS among adolescents in 1990 reported that at least 59% of adolescents with AIDS were directly infected by adult homosexuals. Victoria Brownworth, when reporting this information, used as the title for her article in the Professional Journal this: America's Worst Kept Secret, AIDS is devastating the nation's teenagers, and our kids are dying by the thousands, end of quote. This is an epidemic that no one wants to talk about. To hide the fact that most AIDS children appear to be infected by homosexuals, the World's AIDS Day brochure artfully reported that 16% of adolescents aged 13 through 19 had been infected through heterosexual contact, rather than to report that 84% of AIDS children were infected by male homosexual abuse. Here is an example of media protection. One wonders, where are the thousands of sex murder convictions for the men who fatally infected these teenagers? This stance and behavior of a significant portion of the gay community contrasts with the witness of Scripture and our nation's concern regarding adult sexual predators. At least 17 state legislatures have passed laws to protect women and children against such sexual predators. My point is simply this, that we as a church have been given little or no information about this dark and ominous side of homosexuality. To provide it need not be classified as homophobic or discriminatory. On the contrary, it would be wrong to ignore such information. It's reasonable to expect that this frightening outcome of AIDS among adolescent males will increase if the nation's moral guardians choose to view homosexuality as something God blesses and honors as good. I appreciate the emphasis now being given in our church with respect to learning how to discuss issues such as this one in a respectful and a thoughtful way. But that conversation to result in informed decisions needs to hear both sides of the information. People have heard the policy statements of our mental health institutions. They've noted the adamant push for diversity and utter tolerance in our colleges and universities. They've read the newspapers and articles and magazines that normalize homosexuality. They've seen the struggles of the Boy Scouts for taking a firm stand. They've been influenced by the commissions and divisions of our church that have advocated a pro-gay point of view. I truly believe that people in our congregation should now hear both sides of the issue. Thank you for your attention.